Hello cave dwellers, it's time for another Trash to Treasure, and today it's the turn of the Commodore Amiga CD32. Released in 1993, Computer Gaming World reported, in spite of Commodore's earlier efforts to disguise the fact, the Amiga is a great gaming platform. Commodore intended to capitalise on its realisation, but just months after the CD32's release, they'd filed for bankruptcy. This donated console then deserves to be put back together. I mean really, it arrived in two parts. Commodore's swan song, the world's first 32-bit console, the CD32. Here she is then, a console of two halves. The top here houses the CD-ROM and this PCB. Home to the headphone jack and its volume slider, the reset switch and the power and activity lights. The styling of the machine is a departure from their first CD-based system, the CD-TV, which mimicked hi-fi separates, this more in keeping with the size and style of games consoles of the time. The dual-speed CD drive loads your games at a not-so-blistering 300 kilobytes per second, but if you'd arrived here from a floppy disk-based system, you'd have been more than happy. The system board is capable of operating without the top half attached, so let's take a look now at what kind of condition that's in. The flimsy metal shielding required to meet the FCC or Federal Communication Commission's regulations is present here, and it's up to the usual flimsy standard of shielding, although we didn't find a cardboard one like we did in the Commodore 64 recently, so this is high class in comparison. It's fairly easy to access the board by bending the clips up and removing 3 screws. Only 2 screws are present on my system, suggesting that I'm not the first to have opened her up, so I wonder what delights wait inside for us. The lower shielding is also easy to remove, with the only snag being the clips around the composite video and the audio ports here. The shielding, you can see, is gripping onto those ports rather well, but with a swift flick of the wrist using some tweezers, or in my case a conveniently chipped screwdriver which can slip behind those clips and pull them forward, we can gain access to it and release the system board. And here she is then, displaying further acknowledgement from Commodore that, shock horror, they have created a game system, and the code name is Spellbound, which is emblazoned on this Revision 3 board, so named after the song by Susie and the Banshees, and breaking with the Amiga tradition of using B-52 song names for code names, originally started by employee George Robbins. This Revision 3 board was for the US and EU market, although never officially launched in the US, with a revision 4.1 being produced for France, the main difference being the addition of a very desirable 8-pin SVHS video output. First impressions aren't bad at all, with no board battery to leak and no visually degraded capacitors present, with the power switch here looking a little funky and the board in general needing a good clean. So let's get ourselves familiar with the CD32, starting with the external ports. Audio and video can be supplied in a variety of ways, starting with the yellow composite video output here, with audio supplied by the red and white phono jacks, but preferably you'd use the Center S video output for the best possible picture. An RF output was also present as a last resort. Power is supplied via a 4-pin DIN socket which expects to receive a 12 and a 5 volt line. The round port, a departure from the square ones of the 500 and the Amiga 1200, but matching that of the planned and never released Commodore 65. In fact, if you have an original CD32 power supply, you'll notice it says C65 on the bottom. A surplus supply of unreleased PSUs perhaps. The glistening gold expansion slot gives peripherals full access to, well, completely take over the system should they wish, in much the same way the side bus on other Amigas do. And expansions such as full motion video modules could be added, or the fabled SX32, which effectively turned the CD32 into a full-blown Amiga 1200 desktop machine. A couple of DB9 joystick ports adorn the side, and this round keyboard/serial port, again a nod to the machine's Amiga 1200 roots because, with a small exception we'll look at shortly, this was pretty much a consoleized A1200. So let's look on the board itself and see what makes this tick. Highlighted here we have the small but incredibly important Motorola 68EC020 CPU, the same 14MHz processor as the A1200. It was slower than the average PC CPU at the time. They were clocked at around 16 to 33 MHz, but of course they were lacking the custom chips complementing this CPU. It wasn't great for a desktop machine, but it was nearly double that of a Sega Mega Drive or Genesis, which, coupled with a Mega CD, was actually a competitor despite its age. In short, not bad for a gaming machine. This chip is the Kickstart ROM containing the core code required for the system to do anything. Version 1 was for the Amiga 1000 in 1985, running through to 3.1 officially in 93. The A1200 launched with 3.0, the CD32 with 3.1, the only difference being that CD-ROM support was obviously needed, and that was added, as well as support for the Akiko chip. The what chip? Well, it's this one here. Akiko is unique to the CD32, although it was present in a prototype CD drive for the A1200 which would have turned it into a CD32. Akiko replaces 3 individual chips, including the CIA chips on the A1200, managing the system timers, game ports, serial ports and system memory, as well as the CD-ROM controller. Akiko also offers hardware chunky to bit plane graphics conversion, which can be used to speed up 3D games, but alas, the short lifespan of the console saw very few titles take advantage of it, such as Wing Commander, Gloom Deluxe and Microcosm. And the difference it made was, well, it was a nice touch, but a 3D accelerator this really was not. Memory soldered onto the board, these 4 chips amount to 2 MB of chip RAM. Amigas, remember, have chip RAM, which is shared, and fast RAM, which is accessible by the CPU only. The CD32 has chip RAM only. 8 MB of fast RAM can be added by the expansion port. Any more would need an accelerator board with a processor which would allow the system to address more memory, which hopefully we can explore in a later episode. Maybe, if I can get hold of one. Say hello to Alice, another in the long history of female chips in Commodore computers. Alice is a display controller which replaced the chip Fat Agnes in older Amigas, allowing it to take advantage of the wider memory addressing available in the 68020 and greater CPUs. Alice manages draggable screens, those memorable copper effects, and blitter, taking the strain off the CPU to blast blocks of display data around in parallel. Alice is flanked by Lisa, who handles hardware sprites and graphics tasks, supporting multiple video modes and resolutions with up to 256 colours from a 24-bit palette, or just over 262,000 in the impressive but less useful Ham 8 display mode. The display features offered by Alice and Lisa make up part of the AGA or Advanced Graphics Adapter chipset, which you may have heard of, also present in the A1200 and 4000. This was as advanced as graphics ever got on the Amiga without the addition of third-party video cards on big box systems. This is Paula, and she controls the I/O ports, audio hardware and interrupt control. She also controls floppy drives, but of course we don't have one as standard. 4-channel 8-bit sound is Paula's speciality, just as in previous Amigas, but the system also houses a DAC, or digital to analog converter, which we find just here. The DAC then able to convert digital audio on the CD to analog, where it gets mixed with Paula's audio if necessary, streaming 18-bit CD audio to accompany your gameplay. The expansion bus also has a digital audio input line to mix an external source in with the CD and Paula's audio. Pretty flexible stuff, and essential in the new multimedia world the CD32 was attempting to spearhead. Oh, and karaoke. It was good for karaoke too. Those are the main chips to discuss on the system board, and there's a clear divide as we move from left to right into the jungle of capacitors, resistors and output ports. Why does it look like I'm blessing the board? Well, if it helps make it work, then why not? Bless you, my CD32. The console has a reputation for capacitor problems, and let's face it, it's over 25 years old, so we will be replacing all of these, working or not, to ensure it lasts for many more years to come. But boy, are there a lot of them. I'd better start picking montage music for part 2. A couple of through-hole caps make up the team. There's no visible damage, and I believe the previous owner powered it up just before donating it, so I don't think we'll do any more damage by powering it up, so let's give it a go. If you, like me, don't have an original power supply, then what are the options? Well, we need to supply a 12 volt and a 5 volt line to the console. You could achieve this by hacking up a PC power supply, or you could get a supply like this from my hard disk recovery toolbox. This is used to power up hard disks and gives the desired supplies via a Molex connector. Try and find one which supplies 2 amps if possible. You could create a female Molex to male DIN connector if you so desired. Or you could just buy a ready-made one. Surprisingly, replacement PSUs for the CD32 are easy to come by and not particularly expensive, especially when compared to, say, finding an original gamepad for the system. The stock power supply provides 2 amps, you may need a little more than that if you have an expansion present such as the SX32, my supply then should cover all bases. Power on time then, and what do we see on our screen? Well, that's not bad actually. It's not usable, but we can see through the rolling and flickering picture that the CD32 is alive. Kind of. That was the composite picture output, so next I tried it on the RF output and I got similar results. Results which confused my video capture device to hilarious effect. Have a listen. Yeah, that's not quite right, is it? But the audio is correct on the TV, that's just my capture device struggling with the intermittent output given by the console. Next I hooked up the CD drive and popped a game in to test it. Having spoken to the donor of this machine, I was convinced it was broken, but to my surprise, we actually have a working CD drive. And at this point I must say a big thank you to YouTuber GadgetUK164, who gave me a replacement laser in anticipation of this series. Gadget, if you need it back, just shout, otherwise it will make a handy spare, as there are plenty of lasers about for the CD32, but quality ones are really hard to come by.
At long last, Trill is a free man. Here is the evening news. It is reported that 59 arrests were made today and 13 Securico agents injured in violent clashes at the 2-month-old pickets of Alpha Detention Center.
And that then is the condition of our CD32. We've learned a little about what's inside it and what we're up against. I'm hoping that recapping the board, which won't be a quick job, will fix the video output problems and we can get down to cleaning it up and learning more about what it has to offer. Or will we be faced with the prospect of faults with one of the chips which are unhelpfully soldered to the board? Find out in part 2 of our CD32 Trash to Treasure very soon. As always, thank you for watching, Cave Dwellers, and take care.